Should we start at 1 or should we get going? What's your preference? Probably start at 1, right?
Yeah, or we can, yeah, let's start at 1, yeah, for everybody to join. Yeah.
Okay, I will maybe start ever so gently the welcoming. I know we're moving right to on our mark. I recognize that some of the participants who are dialing in for this post-lunch second session may not all have been in our pre-lunch first session. So just for the benefit of those who are joining us for, shall we say, the first time for this CACM recommendation webinar, the backdrop to this webinar is that we as ACER a year ago received a request from the European Commission to provide a recommendation on amendments to the CACM regulation, capacity allocation, congestion management. And after quite a number of processes of scoping, drafting, and public consultation the first half of the year, we, alongside NRAs, have evaluated input and started a review process with TSOs and NEMOs. And as a result of that, before the Christmas break, we as ACER, pursuant to the agreement reached within our board of regulators with all 27 EU NRAs, we sent the recommendation to the European Commission, and indeed we also made it public at the same time. This is a fairly wide-ranging recommendation striving to improve the entire CACM regulation. And as such, we split this webinar into two, one before lunch and now one follow-up session after lunch. This session will tackle those parts of the recommendation which focus on capacity calculation, bidding zone review, and system operation. And indeed, as you can see here in the agenda before us, in a second, I'll pass the floor to Martin Poe of ACER, who will kick us off with a broad brush presentation of some of these elements in our recommendation. And as we did before lunch, there will be a brief panel discussion or panel interventions. And then we would move to a Q&A session, which Christophe Chancreux will moderate. We only have 15 minutes allocated for it, but hopefully that will prove broadly enough. And then, as we did before lunch, we would leave the floor to Anna Marie of the Commission to indicate a little bit the next steps, also in procedural terms, from the point of view of the European Commission. I think with that, I may pass the floor to you, Martin. Yes, excuse me, housekeeping rules. I'm sorry. I apologize. So those who will be speaking either as presenter or in a panel, they of course have speaking rights, which means that they can also turn off the camera. Please turn off your microphone and your camera when you're not addressing the webinar. The Q&A is not in the chat, it is in the Slido system, which several of you be familiar with, just as it was before lunch. Indeed, and I should probably note, just for the record, that as we did before lunch, we will record also this session of the webinar and make that available on our website alongside the slides, which will be shown, well, those from earlier today, but also in this session as well. Yes, those of you who put questions in the Slido, if there is a particular individual that you would like to address the question, please state so. Otherwise, we will make up our mind as to who might be best placed to address it. And without further ado, I turn it to you, Martin, for a brief overview of some of these parts of the recommendation that we have submitted to the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So good afternoon, everyone, from my side as well. So in this 1 hour presentation, we will show you the recommendations we made on a few parts of the CACM, on capacity calculation, bidding zone review, and the amendments in the ACER regulation. So these are chapter 3, chapter 5 in the new recommended CACM, and also some amendments in the ACER regulation. First chapter on the capacity calculation, there were quite some proposals for amendments. First, on the on the objectives, what we try to achieve there is to mainly to harmonize, to enhance further the efficiency, to implement certain provisions from the clean energy package, like introducing the new RCC framework, which was previously the coordinated capacity calculator. So these are the main elements. Also, the 70% requirement in the which is quite a major element of the clean energy package. So all these elements required some amendments to the capacity calculation. Compared to the amendments to the MCO governance, they are not so dramatic. So they are considered as evolutionary improvements. So we don't think that they are changing the framework of capacity calculation that much. Having said that, I go first to the first topic, the first major issue, which we propose to revise a bit, which is the determination of capacity calculation regions. Here, the key problem in this area was the advanced hybrid coupling. So the concept by which one region can limit cross-zonal exchanges on the border, which belongs partly also to the other region. So what we did, or what was the problem there, we saw that in the existing CACM, this concept is not legally safe. So, for example, if core region limits the exchanges on the borders with the Nordic, like for example the Poland, Sweden, or the Baltic cable, or DK1 Germany border. So these borders are not in the core, but the core would have the right to limit the exchanges on those borders from the core perspective, because they impact also the internal networks in the core. So there, the key question is this allowed? What about the TSOs, the NRAs on the other side of the border? Do they have any say on this matter or not? So what we did is to legalize this concept, in the sense that advanced hybrid coupling is still allowed. It still should continue. It's the preferred model for integrating HVDC interconnectors between the regions into the market coupling. It's just done in a different way. So what we do, we duplicate those borders which are in between the regions. So, for example, the Germany-Sweden border would, in this concept, be both in core and both in Nordic. So you could also see that half of the border is in core, half of the border is in Nordic, and core TSOs have the legal basis to introduce constraints on the core half of the interconnector, and the Nordic have the right to impose constraints on the Nordic half of the interconnector. So this concept is limited only to HVDC interconnectors, also with the one or those radial AC interconnectors between the regions which fulfill certain conditions, which means that they are completely non-interdependent. It also allows, and that's one of the possible solutions, to allow the dissolution of Hansa CCR. We don't think this Hansa CCR is something that it inherently needs to be there. It's there currently mainly as a buffer region, but if we change the concept of region by allowing to duplicate the border, we allow the dissolution of this Hansa CCR, not necessarily, but it gives the space for changing it. And also allows to change the region for different purposes, meaning that, for example, if we merge Italy North and core, we can merge it first only for day-ahead coupling, then later for intraday, then later for forward, and at the end for the ROSC. So it allows to merge certain regions per time frame, for example. So this flexibility is also added. That's on the regions. The second part is on capacity calculation methodologies. So first, we try to clarify the intraday capacity calculation updates and recalculation. So we say that for the first intraday auction, we have capacity calculation update, which means mainly the day-ahead leftovers are updated and given to the first auction. And then we say that there should be capacity recalculation for each, at least for each intraday auction. So currently we have in the design 2 auctions. If somewhere in future, not planning now, but if in future there is a need for additional auction, each new auction would need to be supported by a new capacity recalculation. We also added a reference to the methodology for critical network elements. This was missing from the old CACM, but it was not intentional, so it's a minor clarification. For the location constraints, there were many concerns with this approach. There's a lot of unhappiness about location constraints among stakeholders and NRAs. So what we see, we cannot completely remove them because they do, in fact, protect certain operational security issues. But what we strive for is to provide more justification that we really limit those to the cases where they are absolutely necessary. Then there are no other ways to tackle operational security. The next one on capacity calculation methodologies is adding the provisions on coordinated capacity validation. This concept is now introduced also in clean energy package, where RCC has a role to verify whether TSOs have enough remedial actions in coordination to guarantee a certain level of cross-node capacities. And then this is sort of coordinated validation of capacities. And subsequent, after coordinated validation, there also comes individual validation by each TSO. So this coordinated validation was added as a new step. On the biannual report, so every 2 years we have a biannual report on capacity calculation. We simplified this approach. We say that this is one single report, but it's done by each RCC. And then NCE just compiles this report into one single report at European level. This is an easier task for NCE and a bit more task for RCC, which are the core entities in this capacity calculation process. And also strengthening the focus on validation of capacity, so capacity validation reductions. There, we strengthen the provisions what TSOs need to report and justify when they reduce capacity because of operational security issues. Third one is we try to strengthen a bit the NTC approach. Here we left with 2 options. One option is the so-called tight approach. The other we call the loose approach. With the tight approach, we try to minimize the differences between the NTC and flow-based in terms of calculation processes and steps and transparency. So in the tight approach, TSOs calculate security domain, similar is in flow-based, which means RAM, FRM, F0, these components are calculated for each critical network element. And then at the end, the final security domain is converted into CNTC values. Which means that the 70% adjustment, so when TSOs need to achieve 70%, is they adjust it in the same way as it's in flow-based. They increase the domain, and then the increased domain is converted into CNTC values. In the loose approach, it's more or less similar as today. We don't focus on all critical network elements, but we only focus on the first network element that becomes constrained. So TSOs increase capacity on the border until the first network element is being constrained, and then the rest of the calculation is focused only on this element, which means only all the flow components, so RAM, FRM, F0, all these components which are needed for the monitoring of 70% are focused only on this single or maybe 2 network elements instead of all critical network elements. And also the 70% adjustment is done only for this network element, under assumption that any adjustment on other elements would not have any impact on the final NTC value. So these are the 2 possible approaches. We didn't have an agreement among them. ACER supports the tight approach, whereas some NRAs support the loose approach. we think that from ACER point of view that for the better monitoring of 70% and transparency of CNTC regions, we need to start focusing on all critical network elements, not just one or two. On the capacity calculation process, there was not much change done except this. We added this process of coordinated validation, which previously didn't exist. It exists in the core flow-based day ahead, but not yet in CACM. So we added this element in the CACM. Everything else is more or less the same as it was before. Then on the next one, yeah, that's about the capacity calculation methodologies, capacity calculation process. Main changes are related to the 70%, the transparency, RCC, so to align the processes with the clean energy package and to complement the methodologies where previously they were not so clear. The second chapter I want to introduce is the bidding zone review process. Here we have the overall overview of how the process works. So we have these four basic steps. First, to draft the methodology, which is methodology on the assumptions, methodology, and alternative configurations. Then NRAs in the second step approve this methodology. They have 3 months for that. Then in the third steps, TSOs have 12 months to conduct the bidding zone review study and make a recommendation. So they issue a report, make a recommendation. And then finally, this recommendation proposal goes to member states or their designated authorities for decision, whether to amend or maintain the bidding zone configuration. So the process is fairly described in the clean energy package already. We just sort of align it with the clean energy package and maybe clarify here there are some minor details which are not clear from the clean energy package. What is important for stakeholders is that there was a dilemma: how often and how much do we involve stakeholders? So as we have these processes of TSOs having 3 months, NRAs having 3 months, TSOs having 12 months, this process is very tight in terms of timing. And if you introduce 1 month or 2 months stakeholder consultation in every step of this process, at the end, it would delay the whole procedure for a year or so, or maybe a bit less. So what we propose instead is that during this process, when the first 3 steps, we have a regular stakeholder committee. So which means that there is a committee, as it was in the first bidding zone review process, which meets regularly. It's organized by NCE, by TSOs, or by those who perform the bidding zone review process. And so there is a call for interest every time, and I guess mainly stakeholder organizations will participate in this meeting. And this meeting would, in our view, or hopefully in our view, that would achieve all the needs to involve stakeholders in this stage. So they would be involved more often, more deeply, but there wouldn't be any formal consultation. So the only formal consultation where all the public would be involved is on the final report, and the final report would have the report on all previous steps just compiled in one package. And then on this package, there would be a long consultation, proper consultation with all the public. That's on the process. On the criteria, there wasn't a lot of changes there. So we still try to achieve the high-level objectives as presented in Article 14 of the new regulation. We need to align the bidding zone time horizon to 3 years as for consideration of network expansions. This 3 years is now in the clean energy package, so we are quite limited to that period. We added a new criteria on meeting energy transition targets. This is a new criteria. There are also small improvements to other criteria, but nothing substantial. To a bit higher bigger changes are the network security criteria, which now also includes the amount of remedial actions, so how much remedial actions are needed to achieve the secure network operation. And the economic efficiency criteria includes the cost of remedial action. So that's just clarifying that the volume belongs to the security and the costs belong to the economic efficiency. But otherwise, criteria is pretty much quite similar as today. On the reporting, we made some changes to the NCO technical report on structural congestion. There we added the requirement for flow decomposition analysis. And the main aim is to identify which bidding zones contribute to the most to the most congested network elements. So how much each bidding zone contributes to the most congested network elements. That's one element, and on the analysis of the efficiency of bidding zones is also part of the monitoring activities, but it's done within the framework of ACER monitoring of the internal market, market monitoring report. So there's not any more dedicated report for that, but it's done within the regular ACER monitoring activities. There was one key debate, and it's still not resolved, is how to resolve the problem that, when TSOs report physical congestions, some report congestions which have a frequency of almost zero, and some report congestions which are only occurring very often. And so there is this different standards of reporting, and how do we standardize this reporting a bit more? We try to introduce some threshold for frequency of occurrence of physical congestions. We propose this threshold to be 2%, but this is as an option. So some NRAs don't support, and some stakeholders don't support this explicit threshold. Although we understand that threshold is currently quite arbitrary, it's hopefully we can agree on the aim that we need to put some sort of order in this reporting. Otherwise, the report becomes meaningless if there is no standard way of reporting it. That's about the bidding zone review. And the final part I want to tackle is the changes in the SOGL. There are three main areas where we changed the SOGL. First, I have to know that all the changes come purely from the changes which result from the amended CACM. So because CACM is amended, if you want to combine certain elements of CACM and SOGL together, we need to change also the SOGL. But we don't want to change SOGL beyond amending CACM. So the change of SOGL should result purely from the amendment of CACM. That's how we limit the scope of this amendment. So the first element is the generation and load data provision. So we see that we need to shift this provision to SOGL. There are mainly three reasons for that. So first, CGM for capacity calculation is also shifted to SOGL. That's an obvious reason. But more importantly, we see that the requirements for data for CGM are quite similar or almost the same, whether CGM is used in SOGL or whether CGM is used for capacity calculation. So, but before we had two different methodologies, two different legal frameworks, which stakeholders were being exposed to when being faced to data requirements from TSO. Now we want to unify this into one single article or a group of articles, so that all the data requirements which are needed for CGM are now in one regulation, in one methodology, and therefore simplifies the framework both for TSOs and as well as for the stakeholders when they're faced with such data requirements. However, there is no significant change in the scope of data requirements. In terms of capacity calculation data, the issue is that the generation load data and D-2, so 2 days ahead generation load data forecast. This data is still optional because only some TSOs request this data from their generators and loads, but many TSOs do not collect this data. This data, they rather forecast this themselves. So this is still optional. And one element which was added, which is a change I want to emphasize, is that there is a requirement for DSOs to provide forecast of generation for type A generators. Previously, there was no requirement for providing such forecasts from type A generators, but we see that because of high penetration of small renewables, we see that DSOs need this data to forecast the generation from type A generators as well. So next one is CGM, SOGL. So we also moved the all common grid model provisions from CACM to SOGL. This is needed because the vast majority of CGM procedures are the same for all CGMs, whether they are for system operation or for capacity calculation. At the end, the CGM processes, the data requirements, they are the same regardless of the purpose. So we want to unify and harmonize all those requirements for all CGMs, and thereby simplify the legal framework for TSOs into one single methodology for all CGMs. There is no significant change on the substance of CGM, except the discussion on the best forecast of remedial actions. So we added this provision that each individual grid model needs to include also the forecast, not only of topology, generation load, but also the forecast of remedial actions the TSOs expect to have for the given time frame. In case of D-2 process, so the day-ahead capacity calculation process, such forecasts are conditional to cases where such forecasts can be reliably made. So essentially, if TSOs are able to forecast reliably the remedial actions that will be used for the given time frame, then only then such forecast should be included in the IGM. We know this is challenging, but in some cases it could be done. Finally, the redispatching and counter trading coordination and cost sharing, we also shifted these provisions into SOGL. First, because the coordination of redispatching and counter trading cannot be separated from other non-costly remedial actions. So what we see from the recent discussions and conclusions and decisions, there is one single coordination process which involves all remedial actions. So redispatching and counter trading is a subset of remedial actions which you cannot distinguish and make it separate from other remedial actions. So there is one single coordination, one optimization, and one process, and this requires a single and consistent legal framework. So you can imagine if we have one process and described in 3 different legal frameworks, sooner or later we will come with inconsistent framework and problems in how to interpret those inconsistencies. So we want to harmonize those into one, and then by having unified single legal framework for one single process. Also, coordination and cost sharing are tightly connected. That's why they have to be together. So cost sharing depends on coordination, and coordination depends on cost sharing. So it's very risky if you say these are 2 different processes, let's separate them in different methodology. So our conclusion was, no, it has to be the same methodology, because if you change one element in cost sharing, you might change the coordination and vice versa. So in terms of process, we still have 2 options on the table, how to improve this clarification. Mainly on the cost sharing, we were not able to agree exactly how we specify the cost sharing of redispatching and counter trading. So we have 2 options there. One option aims to try to solve all existing legal disputes and clarifications. So what we find, at least in the core region, is that the legal framework in the clean energy package is unclear and leads to many disputes. So we have for the core decision, we had 7 TSOs and the NRAs lodging an appeal at the ACER Board of Appeal, at the European Court, and all these appeals, they are reasonable because the legal framework is unclear. So instead of us and them, TSOs and NRAs, spending time on solving this appeal, the aim is to clarify the legal framework so that we don't spend time on these legal proceedings. The other option leaves the door open, so it leaves the same level of details as today, which would mean that any differences of views and interpretations would still have to be solved at TSOs and arrays, possibly at ACER at subsequent judicial procedures. So that's the aim, but I guess on the objectives we weren't been able to agree on that. So there was one element that, you know, if you clarify too much, other regions might be constrained by what has been decided by core. This we recognize, so we do leave for this room for escape. So if a region can agree to simplify a certain step compared to core, compared to what is described in the in this proposal, it can do so. And if there's an agreement to simplify or skip certain steps, such a region can have more simplified cost sharing. Okay, that's all I would have from ACER side. And concluding on this, I would give the floor to Ensui for their reactions.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much, everybody, for giving us the opportunity to present our view, although 5 minutes surely will not cover all the items that we have mentioned, but maybe not so similar to what we have discussed this morning. We do see that on the TSO topics or capacity calculation, etc., we are closer together. However, I think the devil is always in the detail, and this is something that we need to acknowledge here. And of course, some of the claims that we have seen previously, as I have just 5 minutes, I try to make it quick. The CCR redefinition, as you also can see in Slido, raises many questions. And also, I think what is sometimes portrayed that we are looking so much forward with this code a decade apart, for example. To what extent can we really foresee what's happening? And I think there are many changes already happening when we talk about CCRs, such as offshore or hybrid interconnectors, also offshore bidding zones, etc. Shall they have a place here and there, or is maybe Hansa also serving a new item or a new place in the future? In order to keep that, I think it is very much sensible for the view of the TSOs that we not only have the freedom to create or keep CCRs in a way that it makes sense, but also to use them beyond potentially what is already written down, that some views are out there saying that certain CCRs shall cease to exist. On the other hand, if you already go for certain items as such, always the question comes up, how do you work with few interconnectors being connected to two CCRs or bigger TSOs than only being connected to one CCR, opening up not just the operational questions, but also governance questions to cooperate. And at the end of the day, isn't it what we are looking for, that we are come somewhat to the table to address the items at hand, and also with the national regulatory side, where we talk about major investments in this area to keep it agile. So we strongly welcome that we made a move in the right direction, but from our perspective, we could go even further and rather make it clear that the current structure shall not already be pre-concluded in a certain way by the current draft regulation. The next item, the 70% in intraday, is all TSOs and regulatory side as well, is rather willing, as well as stakeholders, to not only reach the targets at hand, but also to ensure that there is sufficient capacity in intraday available. But at the end of the day, one needs to acknowledge that the 70% also need to be managed in a secure way and operationally sound, and not just by will and hoping for the best outcome to come. Therefore, for us, I think it's not just sensible that we keep room here and to ensure that the operational processes are abided in a sensible way, but also to look forward in order to find more meaningful measures to apply in the future, as whatever we discuss right now is most likely as an interim step to be seen, and more market design based issues need to be addressed now and in the future, even more when we have more and more penetration of renewables, not just onshore, but also offshore. Hence, the intraday 70% discussion is something that we need to take further into consideration, and we of course call upon the Commission to liaise with us in order to put something forward. This is not only sound in operation, but also has a meaningful forward-looking connotation to it. The third country flows, this is somewhat addressed, but it's not really. This has been somewhat also out of the discussion that we had with ACER and the NRAs in the second part of last year. We hopefully that now we are with the Commission that we can not only work on certain measures which are already taken up. So as we speak, regions prep to find solutions with those third countries, but also that they are properly taken into consideration of the 70% target. So from our perspective, there are various third countries which we have to deal with, and apparently they also have here and there different geopolitical meaning, as we understood from the Commission in some of the discussions that we had. But so let's discuss it in a proper way, and also in a forward-looking way, that we accommodate those kinds of flows, not just operationally sound, but also in the targets that we try or that we need to reach. The notion of harmonization for the sake of harmonization in this case is a rather clear-cut example, I think, where we deviate. Whenever harmonization makes sense, whenever it puts us forward and makes it possible to compare something, then TSOs are very much do not stand in the way. Whereas if it's more or less serving this kind of purpose that we put something similar, which is not similar, or comparing apples and bananas here, this is something that we shall avoid. Hence, putting a constraint or putting certain operational procedures on regions which will unlikely shift towards flow-based in the future and have meaningful ways already to address those kinds of things. We would very much see the way forward, how to approach it, and in parallel also TSOs are already looking at how to further harmonize our procedures when it comes to capacity calculation. Maybe this is the way forward, and less prescribing it in the CACM. Hence, this option 2 is something that we strongly support moving forward in a comitology process. The bidding zone review, this has already been mentioned rather in detail by Martin. I think here we made some progress, whereas we continue to see that, of course, at the end of the day, it is within the responsibility of the member states, of the national regulatory authorities. We do not see that a rigid framework is something that we shall go look forward, and also introducing many new KPIs and which are not really self-describing at all, and maybe also open up new elements is maybe something that we shall not go forward. So therefore, TSOs working on a couple of proposals how to set the boundaries for the future in order to have a proper and meaningful bidding zone review process, which we will put on paper and then also provide to the Commission in due time. The item for cost sharing, unfortunately, this entire cost sharing debate has been somewhat closed for the TSOs and was only, from our perspective, addressed rather late in the CACM revision process. So for us, this is essentially rather new for some of the items, whereas the cost sharing on redispatch has been discussed to a certain extent, and we would kindly see that this rather political discussion is then also taking place. Hence, we would really like to come back to the Commission to talk to us to see how this can be properly enshrined in the code, giving room for the CCRs, which are not core and also have a different topology setup, whereas in core, I think we have a proper way now to move forward. So I think here, as we said earlier, the devil is in the detail, so let's address it jointly and come up with a process that is meaningful looking forward, and also taking into consideration, of course, that we have a move here and there from CNTC to flow-based. The D-2 in the IGM or the CGM creation, I think we had a very, very long discussion what actually best forecast means, and that took us quite some time to get on the same page. I think, or hope at the end, we were coming there. However, I consider that there is still room to improve. And putting this best forecast approach in as explicitly as is right now, although there's now this opener in there, as Martin said rightfully. Yeah, if it is to the benefit, I think that is not really the question right now. I think we are more and more trying to harmonize and implement those the CGM processes also by the way of D-2 processes, including already assumptions here and there, and only partially, because apparently also ACER acknowledges here that it makes sense from case to case. We don't have the same picture, so we would like to stay rather binary in the process and focus on D-1 and D when it comes to those kinds of processes. Wrapping up, and as we have a couple of new items, we would come back, or we will come back to the Commission early March. Hopefully that is the plan right now, with an update of the advocacy report that we have drafted, and try to find hopefully things that also the Commission can acknowledge and include in, from our perspective, even improved CACM 2.1 in this case, where certain items such as the continuous trading and parallel to the IDAS, etc., something like that. Also, this the notion that we have discussed earlier today, where you have the parallelization of intraday gate closure and within bidding zone trading. Those items, I think, need to be detailed a bit more, because they were introduced rather late, and I think a reaction also from those parties that have to ensure that the operations are sound in this kind of rather slim timeline, and not also, I think as Martin put it earlier, getting entangled with SOGL or EBGL requirements. That is something that we need to tackle. Hence, we welcome very much what we have currently in front of us. I think we can reshape it here and there, and hopefully with a positive way of looking forward, and our advocacy report on those topics, we can even take a step further. So thank you very much, and let's stay focused and positive by reshaping it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks a lot for this feedback. I noticed that we are quite behind the schedule, so I asked the EFET to take over the slides, and yeah.
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, everyone. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Lorenzo Vigli. I'm coordinator for electricity at the European Federation of Energy Traders. Now, some views on capacity calculations. We welcome some of the few improvements that were made by ACER in its recommendation to the Commission. However, we still see some further room for improvement, especially on capacity calculation methodologies. These were supposed to be harmonized by December 2020, and they were supposed to be an interim step towards greater Europeanization. So we hope that ACER still has this objective in mind going forward, and also that the task of harmonization is pursued in time. So that's why we propose, before to even anticipate the deadline, to actually meet the target. We also found that transparency and justification could be improved in the way TSOs apply and use allocation constraints on their borders. We've seen some improvements again in the recommendation, yet the CBA is often not public. It's submitted just to the TSOs. And as you know, allocation constraints have a very significant impact on market participants and trading activities. Therefore, we hope that all the transparency and process could still be improved and optimized for capacity calculation to perform in a better way. Also mandating the consideration of costly remedial actions in CCMs. This is a point that we raised before. This is again a point that would lead to, if not included, will reduce overall welfare and economic surplus. So we still hope that this could be included in the following amendments. Still on capacity calculation, third countries, it was mentioned before. Here, I think we really need to grasp the reality of a network and trading activities that have to face third countries in their daily operations. We regret that this was possibly not too ambitious and it was reverted back to the Commission. But again, we really hope to see third countries in the SEC capacity calculation processes, as these are fundamental, and hopefully to include them in CCRs. We propose a couple of options. I'm not going into the details since we're running late, but this is really crucial for electricity trading and should not be ignored. On the last, I tried to fly and go as fast as I could on the bidding zone review. We welcome some of the provisions that were made by ACER and some amendments, especially when it comes to the decision-making process and the alignment with the clean energy package. However, we'll still see the bidding zone review has a very short lead time. 3 years is not enough. We know that this is in the clean energy package, but yet 3 years, especially with the increase of PPAs, that usually is a contract that lasts 5 to 10, 15 years. A bidding zone review is one of the clauses that might end to the termination of the contract. So if we really want to focus on the carbon neutrality as a long-term objective, having a bidding zone review that has such a short lead time, this is not really great for renewable investments. The same goes with offshore hybrid projects with some missing legal definition, and this still today has a different meaning to different stakeholders. And with that, I will conclude my presentation, and thanks again, ACER, very much for inviting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I invite now the slides from Hydroelectric.
Thank you. So yes, I'm presenting here Hydroelectric views. I will try to be shorter, and since a lot of comments have been made, I've been provided by TSOs and IFET that we actually share. I will probably insist more on the selection of crucial point for us for Hydroelectric. So first table about the next slide. So biddings and review. So the first point is that we really acknowledge and welcome the better alignment of the new version of CACM with Article 14 of electricity regulation. We had some concerns, point of concerns with regard of last version of proposed by ACER. So yes, this is a good news. Then, however, yes, let's say that we regret that the stakeholder involvement and transparency is not better introduced in this part of CACM. So you mentioned that yes, regular stakeholder involvement is foreseen, but for us the wording that is used in the CACM recommendation is not sufficient. And yes, we have a proposal for improving this to be, let's say, a more regular stakeholder involvement all along the process, and not only one mandatory consultation at the end of the process. And the third point about the bidding review is that we regret that this was not the opportunity to include new criteria that are important for us. So the so-called criterion transition costs that is already included in CACM, in CACM. If it is understood at the amount of stranded costs associated to a configuration change, it should be a major dimension of a bidding and review process. So we asked to introduce calculation of transit costs for merchant assets in the criteria needed. So this is the first point, and then it has been already said, but the new criteria about the ability of bidding zone to ensure energy transition targets are met. It's quite difficult to assess, I think, and for us, it's not an objective to be pursued per se. And next slide, I think that all points have been already mentioned. So maybe just to underline that I think that we prefer, as Eurelectric, the new formulation and more, let's say, a neutral formulation on the 70% threshold that has been proposed in this version of CACM. As Ifat mentioned, we really call on EC to introduce in CACM a framework for sub-countries. And maybe the last point I will mention is about the fact that we do not agree deleting completely the key principles related to RDCT from CACM. So, and we have a concrete proposal for this. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to you, Christophe, now.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. So I have a few questions related to the definition of capacity calculation region for you, Martin. Maybe I will try to summarize all those questions together. So the first one is about, it's a concrete one about the TSO coordination. How shall TSO coordinate an operation on a particular bidding zone which would belong to two different capacity calculation regions? And in particular, if one set of rules apply to one TSO and another set of rules applies to the other TSO, how should a TSO coordinate this? There is also a related question about in the case we don't have an ANSA region anymore, who will decide, which CCR will decide regarding the type of long-term transmission right issued on this on the border belonging to the ANSA region, and more broadly, Martin, how do you see the complexity if we decide to remove the ANSA region?
Yeah, these are great questions. I'll try to be short. In terms of CACM framework, the coordination over HVDC lines is not that important because this HVDC line doesn't impact any other bidding zone border. So we need to have some interface between the two regions. You know, if we don't want to merge Nordic and core, we need to have some interface, and the best interface is to have in the middle of HVDC lines. So because there is limited need to coordinate on those HVDC lines. So in this respect, TSOs in core only need to coordinate how this HVDC line impacts core, and TSOs in Nordic only need to coordinate how TSOs in Nordic, how these lines impact the Nordic. There is not much need to coordinate over the HVDC line, but there is still some need, and this is what we call the cross-regional coordination. So in the second step, the Nordic and core will see if there is still some issues caused by over the HVDC, or there is a need for some cross-regional coordination. There will be a cross-regional coordination, but from the capacity calculation point of view, there is no need to coordinate on HVDC line because HVDC line has thermal limit. You know, if it's in its thermal limit, but the main capacity calculation is on each side, how it affects the AC network on one side and how it affects the AC network on the other side. So from the CACM point of view, we don't think there is a lot of coordination needed. From the FCA point of view, that might be a bit different. Indeed, like the question on LTTR and forward capacity allocation. For this, when FCA will be amended, we will have to make some specific cases, in which case only for these border, which is in 2 regions, the NRAs on both sides have to coordinate, and TSOs on both sides have to coordinate when approving or deciding on certain elements. So there might be some specific exceptions where such coordination of both parties on both sides have to be coordinated with making certain decisions. It's not what we propose is not perfect, but it allows to dissolve HANSA, which today is a sort of region which calculates the thermal limit, and all the rest, all the other issues are done in core and Nordic.
Thank you, Martin. Maybe a follow-up question on this capacity calculation region definition. Do you have a timing in mind for the redefinition of this capacity calculation region?
No. So the timing will depend on when core is ready, when Nordic is ready. So it will depend on the field development, when certain region is ready, and in terms of implementation projects, when is the right time to, for example, merge Italy North or get rid of HANSA, or if we get rid of HANSA. So all this is flexible for implementation.
Thank you. Now we'll move to the question relating to the bidding zone review, and then there is a question from Paul first. What is the added value of the new criterion on the cost efficiency of the energy transition? And maybe Martin, if you could specify what will be the procedural rules if a member state decide to amend the bidding zone configuration.
So on the first element, it's a difficult question. So we are faced with the request that we need to mention energy transition targets, but the concern was that sometimes, at least in the past, we've seen the attempt that such a criteria could be misused by saying, well, yeah, everything is fine with alternative configuration, but we need to achieve the energy efficiency target, so we can't implement it. So I think that criteria aims to acknowledge that these targets need to be met, but should not give the member state the veto right to say, yeah, we reject the amendment because we have energy transition targets to meet. So yeah, that's why this efficiency criterion is there. So maybe alternative configuration can reach these targets in a more cost-efficient way.
Thank you, Martin. Maybe 2 last question because we are running out of time related to the intraday time frame. Why did so the first question is from Johannes. Why did ACER not consider the introduction of a regular monitoring report on the assessment of the implementation of intraday auction? So this is the first question, and the second question is about the access to the explicit access to the intraday time frame. Why did we remove the explicit intraday access in Article 64 and 65?
So on the first question, I think that implicitly this is there. So because we have a report on market coupling, and market coupling involves that and intraday continuous as well as intraday auction. So I assume the reporting on the efficiency of auctions will be part of this report. We could be indeed more explicit, but we could also improve that, or the Commission could improve that. On the removal of explicit access, this is a difficult topic. So at the first CACM, this was there because at that time we didn't know whether how XBIT and how continuous trading will run. Now the XBIT is quite mature, it functions quite well. And in our assessment, the available products are mainly covering the needs of participants. And that's why we didn't see that, except for lowering the PX fees, we didn't see any other motivation to still keeping the explicit access. We understand that PX fees are important; they are not negligible. But yeah, on the other hand, the implicit trading does have certain advantages as well.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I think I will stop here in the interest of time. Maybe two last comments from my side. There was one question about whether ACER will publish an assessment of the feedback received during the public consultation. Just to inform you to confirm that we did publish this assessment on our website. I think this is an annex to our recommendation. And there was one question from Paul about whether ACER has an opinion on the level of capacity offer on some HVDC cable. My answer to this question is please wait. June we will publish a report, a comprehensive report on the 70% target. I will stop here now and give the floor to Anna Maria for the closing statement and an overview of the next steps.
I see in chat Anna Maria had the same problem that some of us had initially to be able to open mic and camera. I wonder, Nina, can you externally authorize that so Anna Maria can come in and give a few closing remarks on how the Commission envisages to take this forward?
Thank you. It works now. Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Nina. Yes, I will be extremely short. I think the two webinars, the two sessions we had today really show the tremendous amount of work that has gone already into the revision of CACM, and which is the result of frank, open, and all-encompassing debate. And again, let me thank ACER, the NRAs, the TSO, traders, and all market participants for their involvement. On the one hand, this lays down the foundation for our work. On the other hand, we also on the Commission side will have some work to do, which is to draft the actual proposal based on the recommendation from ACER, but also on our own analysis. Also here, just let me mention very briefly that our work will also touch upon the issue of third country, which was raised by Andre and Lorenzo. The next step is a public consultation, which we aim to launch in spring this year, and based, as I said, on the ACER recommendation, our own analysis, and the results of the public consultation, we will then put forward a proposal, a legislative proposal in shortly after the summer, with a view of having the revised CACM adopted in early 2023. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria, also for the brevity, as appreciated. We are 1 minute over time, which I think is pretty well done, considering the substance of the matter. I want to thank you for participating both before lunch and here after lunch. Thank you, Martin, also for the comprehensive presentation. Christophe and Martin for the questions. Certainly, thank you for the external participants for providing your views. And I would just close by reiterating that we will make the slides available as well as the recording. And I think Mathieu was saying in chat that we'd find some way of capturing the questions and answers in the Slido type format and find a way to make that available as well. So thank you very much for participating. It's been a very comprehensive set of work, and now it's for the next phase and so forth. Thanks a lot and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.